All right, welcome to the ReConnect MOOC course on Introduction to Chinese Politics and Society. My name is Professor Lauri Paltemaa and I'm going to introduce you to a central concept in Chinese politics, namely the party state. The party state is indeed a key concept to understand the Chinese political system. It's originally a Leninist construction which refers to V.I. Lenin, who led, of course, the Chinese, the Russian Revolution in 1917 and then established the Soviet Union. This system was originally designed, therefore, for the Soviet Communist Party to take over the old Tsarist state machinery and assume control of all of its functions. And it proved to be a very efficient way for the Communist Party to govern and control the state machinery in the Soviet Union. And it was consequently then used in all the communist countries, systems that were created after the Soviet Union. And this also applied to the People's Republic of China, which was established in 1949 after a successful communist revolution led by Mao Zedong, where the Chinese communists basically studied carefully the Soviet example and used the same techniques as the Soviet Union and the Soviet communists had used to take control over the old state machinery. Basically, it is a system whereby the Communist Party has organizational presence and leadership on all levels of the state institutions. But it's not only the state institutions that the party leads and governs in China, it actually leads all the popular or social organizations, companies, and the military. So it's more encompassing a concept than just a state, although the name is party state. The Communist Party charter puts this relation in a rather poetic way, and I quote it here. Party, government, army, popular organizations and schools, east, west, south, north and the center, all these are led by the party. So this is basically a very good way to summarize the way the Communist Party controls the Chinese society and all organizations in it. And the party itself is therefore a key organization that we need to look more carefully into and understand in order to understand Chinese politics. As noted, it leads Chinese society on all levels, and it is an extremely large organization. Established in 1921 with the aid of the Soviet Russian Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party has grown to be the second largest political party in the world as we speak. It has roughly 96 million members, at least according to its own announcement. How the party then leads basically or governs Chinese society, it has two basic functions that it controls. One is that it decides policy lines, that is what the party state does, and then it nominates the persons who make these decisions. So it decides who makes the decisions in Chinese politics and society. For that, it maintains the system of so-called nomenclature, that is a system of promotions, positions and promotions that are available for party members in Chinese society. And indeed, the party membership is the only practical channel to leading positions in Chinese politics. Maybe 95% of China's leading cadres are Communist Party members. And how then the party makes its decisions? How is it organized to make the decisions? For that, we need to look into how the so-called party center is organized. Party center refers to central decision-making bodies in the Communist Party, especially the Central Committee and its smaller organizations within it. First, however, there is the leader, the core, as he is designated in the party language, Party General Secretary Xi Jinping, who is, by the designation of the core, the leading decision maker in the party. He leads the Politburo Standing Committee around him, which is a body of him plus 6 members at the moment. These men basically form the functional government of China, meaning that they are there making the highest political decisions every day, constantly. The Standing Committee is prepared to be convened at any point of week. So it is constantly there making the most authoritative decisions under the leadership of its core Party General Secretary Xi Jinping. The Standing Committee is actually the Standing Committee of the Politburo, which is a body of 26 members at the moment. It makes decisions of more principal importance and basically it usually convenes maybe 2 times a month to make these decisions under the leadership, of course, of the Standing Committee and the Party General Secretary. Members of the Politburo represent leading provinces in China, the army, the most important ministries in the central government. The Politburo is the Politburo of the Central Committee. Central Committee is the body that basically represents the Party Congress when the Party Congress is at recess. It is a body of a little less than 400 members, about half of which have voting rights and the rest are the so-called alternative members. This Central Committee meets maybe twice a year to make the most authoritative decisions that the party makes that year. Questions of ideology, questions of party history, questions of economic reform, etc., etc. Central Committee meetings are important ones in Chinese politics, but they are rather infrequent, and therefore the practical policy making in China is in the hands of the Politburo, its Standing Committee, and of course the Party General Secretary. The Central Committee is the Central Committee of the party, and it is selected, or rather it's elected by the Party Congress, which convenes every 5 years and has over 2,000 voting delegates. I said the Central Committee is elected. There are elections where there are more candidates than there are actually seats in the Central Committee, but this is not a free election. The electoral lists of candidates have already been carefully decided by the outgoing Central Committee. So party has very limited internal democracy in the terms of voting and electing the delegates to the party congresses, but also by the party congress electing its Central Committee. Now, this is the basic hierarchical structure of the party center. But then the party center also has a number of offices, commissions, leadership groups under it, which it uses to basically policy making and everyday policy making. And next slide tries to illuminate this structure in a little bit more closely. Basically, the party central organizations are organizations by the Central Committee, and they are, or governed by the Central Committee, and they are divided roughly in 3 sectors. First being the party itself, having a number of commissions and offices that have specific functions, including propaganda and organization and party own internal discipline inspection. There is the party secretariat, which runs the party central daily work, which is a very nodal and important post, of course, for the running of the whole party. Then there is the military. You have to note that the People's Liberation Army in China is a party army. It's basically led by the party, and the party general secretary, Xi Jinping at the moment, is also the head of the central military commission, which basically supervises the army and also commands it in time of crisis, at least politically. So the party controls the army closely, also organizationally. And then there is the sector that deals with the state institutions, society and economy, and it has a number of commissions and leadership small groups listed here. Maybe it's not worth of learning the names of all the commissions and small groups by heart, but it's more important to see how encompassing the party central organizations are in terms of the sectors that they try to manage through these different leading groups and commissions. The commissions and leading groups are basically groups of the leading cadres from the state ministries, the army, different organizations who come together under the leadership of the Central Committee to make the most important decisions on their own sectors, trying to coordinate with other sectors through this system. Many of these commissions and leading small groups, leadership small groups, are actually headed by Xi Jinping himself, which is one of the key aspects of his personal power in the Communist Party at the moment. Now, we are talking about the party state, so there is obviously also the state organization here. To briefly describe it, the People's Republic of China has formally Republican state institution, which means that it has a president that is who is elected every 5 years, and it has National People's Congress, which stands for the functions of a parliament in a liberal democratic system. It is basically the highest legislative body in the country, and it's elected indirectly by the provincial People's Congresses, which are then elected indirectly by the lower level administrations. Only the lowest levels of administration in China have direct elections, and even here the Chinese Communist Party controls directly and carefully the elections. About 80% of the National People's Congress delegates are actually Communist Party members. So the Communist Party controls its parliament closely, not only through organization but also through its membership. Also, some other organizational sectors are represented in the National People's Congress, like the ethnic minorities or the People's Liberation Army. The National People's Congress convenes once a year. Usually it's at the end of March of each year, where then it ratifies legislation and reports from the central government, including the state budget. To operate, it actually has its own standing committee, a much smaller body, which then convenes regularly and is basically the parliament in China. Also, what the National People's Congress makes, at least nominally, is that it elects the president, it elects the standing committee for itself, and then also the state council. But basically, the Communist Party, through the organization of the party state, which also includes such bodies as the National People's Congress, controls all these election processes. And of course, all the leading cadres on the state side of the party state, like the prime minister or the ministers, are party members, or at least most of the ministers. Some of them in history have been also members of the smaller parties that do exist in China, but they don't actually have any decision-making powers in Chinese politics. Now, there is the position of the president, of course, in this Republican institutional setting, but his position is mostly ceremonial, which means that the real power is in the party general secretary. The distinction, of course, is just, well, rather insignificant in the sense that it's the same person. Xi Jinping is both the president of the People's Republic of China and the party general secretary, a latter position being, of course, much more important and decisive. It is indeed typical that the leading party cadres have also state position, meaning that the number 2 in the party hierarchy is in the party center, and the member of the standing committee is also the prime minister. Number 3 in the party hierarchy is the chair of the National People's Congress, etc., etc. So they have these so-called 2 hats, or 2 seats where they sit, basically embodying the idea of the party state. There's also a very peculiar Chinese organization named the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference that convenes also along with the National People's Congress each year. It is a consultative body about the same size actually as the National People's Congress, where members, non-party members or more non-party members are elected or selected from Chinese society to represent in a corporativistic manner different sectors of Chinese society outside the Communist Party. Its function is basically officially to consult the National People's Congress in its legislative work, and basically it functions as an well, consultative authoritarian body whereby the people's voice supposedly is better represented in Chinese political decision making. Actual powers of the CPPCC are not that substantial. Now, below the National People's Congress, at least organizationally, formally, is the State Council, which is the highest executive body in China. It's headed by Prime Minister, and it's basically the equivalent of the cabinet in Chinese politics comparing to the liberal system, but it has no independent powers outside the party center, of course, and all the leading ministers in the State Council, members there, are of course leading party cadres at the same time, as we already discussed concerning the concept of the party state. The State Council has its own standing committee because the State Council itself convenes only very irregularly, maybe once or twice a year, while the standing committee of the State Council then is all the time convened, at least in principle. And like the party center, the State Council has its own commissions and leading groups to coordinate policy making and implementation between different ministers and other state organizations. The Prime Minister is an important position in Chinese politics. He is officially at least number 2 in the official hierarchy, just below the party general secretary, and the Prime Minister chairs the State Council. Usually, Prime Minister has been in charge of much of the economic policy making, drafting and implementation, but under Xi Jinping these powers have been eroded. But in principle, the Prime Minister is in charge of drafting and implementation of legislation and supervising the state administration below the central government. Now, ministries and ministers thereby in the Chinese political system are actually less powerful than they would be in most of the liberal democratic system, because there are still many layers of power hierarchy above the ministers. Here, schematically, the division of labor and different institutions of the state side of the party state. Basically, however, you need to remember that it's the Communist Party Central Committee that has informal but very substantial control over these bodies. There is the president, who's elected by the National People's Congress, which is controlled also through its membership by the Communist Party. And then there is the People's Political Consultative Conference, which has also non-Communist Party members, but as noted is not that significant in Chinese politics, apart from its symbolic value. State Council is below the National People's Congress and chaired by the Prime Minister. And then under the State Council there are different ministries and commissions which number dozens in Chinese political system. Judiciary is actually part of the executive. It's not independent. There is no separation of powers in Chinese political system. It's all one party state which is led by the party, and judiciary is just one sector of the state. Basically, there is no judicial independence in China. And then there are also a number of other bodies under the State Council, like the People's Bank, which is not independent like in most of the liberal system, and even such bodies like the Xinhua News Agency is actually a government office and not an independent news agency, just underlying how the control of the political system, including the media, is ultimately in China in the hands of the Communist Party. All right, I end my lecture, very brief one, here. Hopefully you now have a better grasp of how what is the Chinese party state and how it is organized, at least in the central level. Thank you.